Look at that. Not just by phone. Hello, Bob. Wave.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me? That's the question.
we can hear you
All right, good. We're there.
and see you in your corner office of your corporate empire there.
I'm going to turn this light off there. No, that's not working. The less you see of me, the more effective my presentation will be.
I know that feeling. Bob, thank you for joining us. And to my right is Patricia Patty Houlihan, a dear friend and exceptional financial planner in Virginia, correct? It's great to have you.
Virginia,
Yeah, that part is correct. So for those who don't know, Bob, first of all, you are facing a room full of primarily students.
I can see them, actually.
Oh, you can. Good. It's a two-way. So for those who don't know, we're primarily here in the next hour to talk about standards of care for investors. And for a long, long time, we've debated and discussed that there are primarily two standards, really three standards of care to investors. One is from securities brokers who have a standard of care generally referred to as suitability. So the advice they give to an investor client of theirs must be suitable to that investor's needs. The next level up would be a fiduciary standard that folks like Patty owe their clients, which means that the advice they give must not only be suitable, but it must be in the best interest of their client. The third and highest level is the ERISA fiduciary standard, which is due from fiduciaries to retirement plans, and that advice must be in the client's sole interest, not just best interest. So there's three standards there. We're primarily here to talk today about the standard due from brokers to their clients, as well as that due from investment advisors, such as Patty, to their clients. And along those lines, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the spring of this year proposed a set of amendments to the broker-dealer's standard of care to their clients called Regulation Best Interest. It had three parts. One was to raise the standard of care that brokers owe their clients from the suitability standard to one they're calling a best interest standard. A second part of that release involved some disclosures that brokers and advisors would have to provide to their clients at the initiation of the relationship. And the third was a clarification of and asking some questions about the standards that advisors are due and how they should be regulated with respect to the advice they give their clients. So the first question I'm going to ask, and Patty, we're going to start with you and give Bob a chance to warm up, because he can be fairly shy, if you don't know Bob, and reticent about expressing himself. So we're going to see if Patty can get him going. So Patty, I know both of you are very well acquainted with the SEC's proposal, and we know that they've offered up a comment period which expired roughly a month and a half ago, and so now I'm sure they're studying over all the comments they received. Hard to say what kind of timeline they will be on from here to finalize a rule, but let's start with the basics. Thumbs up or thumbs down on the SEC's proposal?
2 thumbs down.
2 thumbs down.
And
why?
why?
If it raises the standard of care for investors, why 2 thumbs down?
2 thumbs down because I've been doing this almost as long as my dear friend Harold and Dina. I came into this world as a math teacher, stopped teaching math when I had my children, and then came back to figuring out what I wanted to do in my next career. And the College for Financial Planning was very new, and my number is very low, so I'm very early into the CF program. But when you came through, and having taught for 15 years, and I've taught a lot of students, both on the high school level and adults, one of the things that I would say to you is that you need a place to start, don't you? You all are already looking. I'm going to get to the answer, I promise.
As moderator, I'm looking at my watch. but
Okay, I'm going to get there.
We have lots of time.
But you need a place to start. And too often when my students, when I was teaching at GW, would say to me, Patty, are you hiring? But I wasn't. I'm a small practitioner. I'm fee only. And we don't have a large staff, and especially now with technology. So where do you go to get a job? Same place I went when I was sitting in your seat, when I was in my early 30s, younger than you, but basically starting out. My choices were insurance companies because they had great training. You're shaking your head, right? Broker dealers, because, and in both situations, if you had family and lots of friends, you were going to get hired because they figured you were going to be able to sell to your family and friends. And I would say to my students, but that's a place to start. Going to the best interest and the fiduciary standard. I would say to all of my students going through review courses for the CFP exam, I don't care that you get a commission. What I care about is that you do the right thing for the client sitting in front of you. Not the right thing for yourself, but the right thing for the client in front of you. If you've got $10,000 to invest, a client, do you want to spend $400 an hour to come see a fee-only planner to tell you where to put the $10,000? How many would want to do that? So there's a place in this world for commissions, but there's no place in our world if we're going to ever be viewed as professionals. There is no place for putting your interest in front of the clients. None. Whether you got licensed to Series 7, 63, 65, and all of those series that you can get. It's up to us, and I'm going to quote Harold, it's up to us to inform clients and to inform the media to let the world know there's no option other than being a fiduciary in the world of giving financial planning advice, period. So 2 thumbs down on the SEC for saying regulation best interest. Because if somebody asks you, what does it mean to be a fiduciary? What is the plain English that you would use? We're going to put your best interest first. When I was asked at a conference by someone walking along with me, what is a fiduciary? That's exactly what I said. Somebody that gets to know you and what your needs are and what your goals are, and only makes recommendations in your best interest. I wrote my letter to Clayton and Chairman Clayton and said exactly that. This is the worst outcome I can imagine. Using the words best interest without defining it and without using the fiduciary word simply confuses and does nothing to help us help clients understand what's the best way to go for them. Do you agree with me, Bob?
Yeah, well, I'm wishing I had a third thumb. Maybe I'm 2 thumbs down Patty and I were sitting next to each other at a conference, the FI 360 conference earlier this year. And there was a panel of people from diverse backgrounds, shall we say. And Canute was on that panel also. And I think Skip was also, as I remember now. And the brokerage representatives who were on that panel were asked about the standard, and they were smirking and they were smug looking, and that told me more than I needed to know about what the new standards were. If they were really happy with it, then there was obviously something terribly wrong with it. And I think what's terribly wrong with it is, if you're trying to protect the public, there's 2 ways to do it. Number one is you require everybody to be acting in the best interests of the client, period, the end. Everybody, no matter who they are, if they give advice, you require them to give. And the brokerage industry did a really wonderful job of shooting that down by saying that that was unrealistic. And basically what they're saying is, you can't expect us to change our culture and be, non-predatory. I mean, that's ridiculous. And somehow the regulators bought that. Well, yeah, you're right. Okay, you're right. And the other way is to help the public understand who's on their side and who's not. And there was option A and option B, and the SEC managed to muff both of them in their proposal. Option A, they don't change the standard at all. They just rename it something that's more, that sounds like it's fiduciary when it's not. And option B was they created disclosures which muddy the waters rather than clarify them. So consumers will be told that, those fee-only fanatics, they've got conflicts too, and you got to watch out for them, just like you got to watch out for brokers. And so the overall effect thing, makes people like Patty and Skip and I frown, and Knut was actually scowling on the panel, and the brokerage industry smirking, which is not the best outcome for us.
Bob, I'm going to stay with you for a moment. Let's draw a scenario. I'm a securities broker, and
you're not a securities broker.
and one of these folks who are with us in the room today, they're in a job for a few years, and then they leave their employer to go to a different job, and they've been putting money into their 401k plan for a few years, and so they've got a few $1,000, and they come to me as a broker, and they say, I'd like to open a brokerage account and deposit this into the account and open an IRA, so I roll over my 401k and retain its tax protected status. And now, and I as a broker say, I'd love to help you. Thank you for coming to me, and you can trust me. And then your next question is, but what should I invest in? And I'm thinking to myself, I have all these products on my shelf. I have mutual funds that pay me a 3 or 4% commission. I have annuities that pay me a 6% commission. I have non-traded REITs that pay me a 10% commission. And I happen to remember, as I'm sitting across the desk from you, that when I got home from work last night and I picked up the mail, my kid's college tuition bill was in the mail. That's a big, big bill. And how do I keep that from influencing my recommendation to my hypothetical client who just opened a brokerage account with me? How do I ensure that my advice is in their best interest and not mine, as Patty said?
Well, I think when you decide to work with a brokerage firm, you took a wrong turn. But
Don't be shy.
I just did a presentation in India for the leading financial planning organizations there, and they asked me essentially the same question. They said, why should we be fee only when we can make more money doing this other thing? And I think it was a sincere question, because they were wondering if they'd made the right choice. And I said, well, back in the day when I first started out, and when Charlemagne was on the throne, that was the best way to make a lot of money was to make a lot of commission revenue. And now the people who make the most money in the financial services world in the U.S. market, I told them, are the people who are running fee-only financial planning firms. And so fiduciary and putting the client's best interest first actually ended up being the most lucrative long-term strategy for the people who who had a long-term time frame in this financial services world. So, I think short-term, yeah, you can make a lot more money with that non-traded REIT. Long-term, you're going to lose clients. You're not going to have credibility. And most brokers I talk to, they realize at some point it's kind of a stinky way to make a living, and they get out of it. And that's why we have all these rogue brokers leaving and becoming fee only. It's alarming the brokerage world.
It just occurred to me, Bob, I'm looking at you on screen, and thank you to David. I don't know if he's in the room, but the video feed is working great. And I'm looking across the room at Harold, who has a really handsome new beard, and the two of you look remarkably alike.
By the way, congratulations, Harold. It was well earned, this award, and I'm really, we've all been proud of you for years, but this gives us another opportunity to do that.
I was remiss at the open for not thanking Dr. Hampton for hosting us today and for your opening remarks. Thank you. Deborah, you as well. Yeah. Perhaps intentionally, I don't know, but Deborah may have intentionally or not neglected to inform us that she teaches at another esteemed university, that of Duke. It's okay. It's a good school. It really is a good school. So Deborah, thank you for being with us and for your opening remarks as well, and giving us some context around Harold's Awards. Thank you. And to Knut, last but not least, for your ceaseless energy around this topic and all these wonderful events you produce, and allowing us to be a part of it. So thank you for that. Knut. Okay, so back to our conversation with Patty and Bob. So I think between the two of them, they have 5 thumbs down on the SEC proposal. So how would you change it? Let's go back to you, Patty. What changes would you make? Did you suggest anything to SEC Chairman Clayton in your
I did.
your Dear Jay letter to him?
Yes. If you're going to call it best interest, it is fiduciary, and don't skirt it. It's just wrong. And I don't believe for 1 minute that you can't make money. Very good, Bob. I didn't realize that we were making all that much money. Thanks for letting me know. But you don't have to, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Even though I choose fee only, the reason I chose fee only is because it was comfortable for me, because I didn't like the commission conflict that I felt was there. I didn't like 10%, 8%, 3%, 4%, whatever, because the variable compensation never made me comfortable. And with fee only, you get to set it, and then you can change it if you think. I was having this discussion with Harold. If you think that you've done the heavy lifting and you want to lower the fee or have a different fee schedule, tiered, disclosure, I'm tiered, 1% to 70 basis points to 50 basis points to being negotiable. You look at, let me tell you what it looks like when you sit with a client and you say to that client, we've helped to grow the money together. You've been a great saver. You've got a wonderful firm. You're doing a wonderful job at what you do. Trusted relationship with us, and say, you know, we're going to reduce your fee. A lot of the heavy lifting, you don't come in as often. They're like, you know, what? It's because it's the right thing. And when I started this, I always said I charge what's fair, not what the market will bear. I charge what I'd be willing to pay me, not what somebody else thinks they can get out of me. And that's not a hard concept, is it? And it ought not to be this hard. Yet Harold has worked tirelessly for years and years and years, getting this fiduciary duty out there. And the oath from the Committee for the Fiduciary Standard, we have an oath, and I know you know about it because of Dina and Harold and your professors. It's not hard to put it in plain English, common sense language that you want to be treated that way. So for me, it's don't skirt the issue. Don't try to put words and then not define them. Don't pretend that, and Knut, you're going to love this, don't pretend that there's no difference between me sitting with you as my client and me sitting with you as my client with my broker-dealer behind me telling me what to tell you, the client.
What to recommend? What
yes.
Products? Yeah.
Yes. So again, that's what I would say.
So if you're going to call it best interest, just
call it what it is. It's fiduciary.
Adhere to
duty of loyalty, duty of care. It's fiduciary.
Yep. Bob, what changes would you make to this rule?
Well, I wrote a long comment letter, and it was absolutely brilliant. And I'm forced to admit, you know, But, I have a conflict of interest. And the conflict of interest is, in a perfect world, I think we do without commissions. I think commissions are always in some way harmful because they get in the way of the best advice and create a different agenda. So if I was trying to create a perfect world, which is not the world I see right now, I would completely do away with commissions. I would separate distribution from manufacturing, meaning the brokerage firms would have to divest themselves of their retail operations and go on from there. That is not what I proposed in my because I don't think that's good for the profession. And my goal, my personal goal, my hope is that we're creating a profession out of financial planning. And to create a profession out of financial planning, we need clarity around what the professionals do, not necessarily about what everybody does. So what I proposed was that, first of all, you define this best interest standard. If it's anything different than suitability, then I want to know what that difference is. And that SEC has been notably silent about that. And you could easily argue that their best interest and the old fiduciary standard, the old suitability standard are exactly the same thing, that they just renamed it something that sounds better and therefore could be used in marketing efforts. What I proposed was you at least clarify the distinction between a broker and a fee-only or a fiduciary advisor. You make it very clear to the public, this person is required to put your interests first and these people over here are not. And that gives the people that I root for, the fee-only financial planners or the fiduciary financial planners, a marketing advantage. But I think, ultimately it's up to us in the profession to make that distinction clear without the help of the regulators. Regulators are always going to be conflicted. The regulators, the SEC regulators, know that if they play ball with the brokerage firms, then they will get a multi-million-dollar salary position with the brokerage firms when they leave the SEC. And so there's every motivation for them to do whatever to sit down with the brokerage firm lawyers and say, all right, is this okay? No, it's not. All right, how should we rewrite it? And that's what we end up with proposals. It's up to us to make these distinctions because they're never going to do it for us. They're conflicted. So I'm a great fan of there being a difference between the sales agents and the true professionals, as clear as possible. The SEC isn't helping us very much, and I would like them to. But as long as there is that distinction, we can find ways to make it clear to the public. And I think the fiduciary disclosure document is one. The fiduciary oath is a great way to do it. You say here I'm signing this fiduciary oath. Now you're also talking to that Merrill Lynch broker. Take it down there and have them sign it, and bring it back. And if they don't sign it, you might want to ask some questions because whoever's interest they're working in, it might not be yours.
I agree totally with you, Bob. And when I was being interviewed last week by the Wall Street Journal, I must have said 10 times in that interview, when she said, what's the solution? That's exactly what I said. The oath. Put it in front of whomever and have them sign it. The oath will tell you whether or not they're truly being a fiduciary with you. One of the things that I don't know if you saw the coalition, the group that they came out, Barbara Oprah did a press release with, they had interviewed 16 people from across the country, 90-minute interviews, and they came out of it with bullet points. And I was reading they called it key findings. The key findings were the people did not understand legal disclosure. How many of us love reading prospectuses?
Pick me.
When I was on the first panel for the SEC back years ago, I said, no one reads a prospectus. You need to have something with bullet points that have the nugget that you need right up front. This is what's in here. And then if you want to kill trees, kill trees. They did not understand the term fiduciary standard. That's what I said a few minutes ago. When you use that word, nobody knows what it is. They think that different standards meant best interest advice. And what really upset me was in looking at the CRS, they actually thought that it was more favorable, that it was better to be on the broker dealer side.
Best interest sounds pretty good.
Sounds real good. And what I've said, and Knut heard me say this so many times, they think we fee onlys are straightening our halo. I've been down on the Hill, I've talked to the staff, I've talked to Mary Jo White, I talked to Mary Shapiro, I've talked to these people, and I'm telling you, they think we're not regulated enough because we don't have the FINRA regulations on top of us. They think we were Mary Shapiro, when she was actually NASD, and I met with her, she was very concerned. I was fee only. She was very concerned that we didn't have the regulation in place and that they needed to be in charge of us. Well, that is the last thing, because they don't know who we are. They don't understand. So going down this, the people were confused and thought that the CRS actually said the broker-dealer was more favorable, a favorable light. They did not understand critical distinctions between different payment models, fees, and associated services. I cannot tell you how many times I sit with a new potential client and ask about something in the portfolio that they've shown me, and I've asked, do you know whether or not you paid a commission? Oh no, it was free. If I've heard that once in my 35 years, I can't even begin to tell you how many times I've heard, no, it was free. They don't understand. And even when I sat in a meeting with a dear friend and the broker said, when I questioned about the hedge fund that was part of the portfolio, the broker said that they did not get that they were not charging an asset management fee on that. I said to the broker, but you were paid. Well, it's kind of like a mutual fund. I said, kind of like a mutual fund. Help me understand that. By the time he finished going around in circles, this dear friend turns to me when we leave the meeting and says, see, I knew he didn't get paid. True story. True story. So
Advisors work for free.
No surprise. Could not figure out which type of fees might cost more. I mean, these are no, are you surprised by any of that, Harold? That's what we've been saying forever. 16 people and a survey that cost, I think, $40,000. Now we know that, Harold, we were right. I could have told him that for $5.
So let's talk about this confusion issue and around the word fiduciary and best interest. I've been doing this advocacy work for 8 years now, and a couple of years ago I was honored with an award, a fiduciary advocacy award, and I went to an event like this and was given the award. It was very much an honor, and I came home and I showed my award to my wife, and she gave me an attaboy, you know, congratulations, that's really great. And the next question out of her mouth was, what's a fiduciary? And I'd been doing this work for 6 years now. I don't talk about fiduciary around the dining room table, obviously. But going back to this rule, when SEC Chairman Clayton released the rule in April, he said he deliberately did not call it a fiduciary rule because he wanted consumers to know that there's a difference between the brokerage business model and the advisory business model. But he subsequently has given a number of talks where he has said, but I really don't see any daylight between the two. I think that's a direct quote.
The columns that they show, they're
on the disclosure document.
It's crazy.
Yep.
I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, but that's the straightening the halo. They really don't want a differentiation for us. They really don't. And if all you need to know is he called it best interest.
He called it best interest, and he said because he wants people to know it's not fiduciary, it's not the same. But then in subsequent public proclamations, he has said there's no daylight between the two. This really is a fiduciary standard. So,
and this survey says that based on their understanding of the term best interest, some participants viewed the CRS as portraying brokerage accounts in a more favorable light than advisory accounts.
Because I understand best interest. I don't understand fiduciary.
Correct.
Bob, what is the SEC trying to do here? Are they trying to make brokers fiduciaries or not?
Well, I think they may have had an honorable intent when they first put pen to paper. And I suspect what happened is they sat down with the brokerage lawyers and they said, is this okay? And is this okay? And can you live with this? And the brokerage lawyer said, let's fiddle with this a little bit. And all that fiddling turned into something that looks more like sales promotion for the brokerage industry than it does consumer protection. But, one of my favorite comments back then was, I remember when Mary Shapiro was chair of the SEC, and here was the most conflicted individual who's ever served in a regulatory capacity. She was previously the president of the organization that promotes and benefits the brokerage industry. And then they said, well, would you consider, regulating the brokerage industry and protecting the public from it? And she readily took the job. She left I think it was $1.5 million salary to take a $1,000 salary. And she's since been handsomely rewarded since she's left the SEC with a significant income where she ended up. And I called it the Shapiro Doctrine. And the Shapiro Doctrine basically was, the public is having a lot of trouble telling the difference between brokers and advisors. So let's just throw in the towel and assume they both do the same thing and regulate in the same way. And my proposal was that, all right, let's apply the Shapiro Doctrine to other professions. Let's take doctors, for example. Let's let the drug companies create clinics. We'll call them clinics, and they have people dressed in white coats, and they carefully assess your blood pressure and your heart rate and see if you have a fever or not, and then they prescribe whatever drugs they happen to be selling that day, and we'll call them doctors, and we'll regulate them like doctors because, of course, the public is having trouble telling a difference. And if you apply that logic to any other profession, it sounds completely ridiculous. If you apply it to financial planning, everybody seems to nod their head and say, well, yeah, I guess that's the way it should be. If we're trying to create a profession, we need to have a clear distinction between the people who are selling and the people who are not, and we need to not coddle the people who are selling and make it appear as if they're professionals. So, you asked my question, I've got my other big toe pointing down now. The SEC compromised pretty much every good principle that I think they started with in the name of playing ball with the brokerage firms. And now what we have is worse than what we started with, is my feeling about it.
Well, I want to go back to this disclosure document, Patty, that you touched on, because the second part of this proposed rule is a mandated disclosure document that brokers and advisors must give to their clients at the outset of the relationship. By the way, no more than 4 pages, no smaller than 11-point font, and standard margins. Now, Harold and Dina, when you assigned papers to your students, I don't know if you gave them that kind of explicit instruction, but I don't even know what standard margins are. But the SEC is going around the country and they're doing town hall meetings with investors, and they're putting this mocked up document in front of investors. And as you noted, other organizations are doing the same. And they're getting a lot of pushback that's very much along the lines of the study results that you mentioned that just came out in recent days. So disclosure, I think people need to know what services they're getting and what they're paying and so on, but what's wrong with this disclosure document?
Well, Ron Rhodes, I had hoped he would be on one of the cameras as well, is famous for saying, no one would agree to being harmed. So when you disclose something, it has a perverse effect of people thinking that you're so honest. You've disclosed a conflict. And now they think, well, back to my point. He disclosed mutual fund like fee. Hedge fund 2 plus, you know how hedge funds are. It was a mutual fee. He had disclosed away. I'm living proof. He did it. He accomplished it. She thought he was just wonderful.
Working for free.
So disclosure, yes, disclosure you need to do. Even CFP board says you have to disclose and manage conflicts. One of the things I always love is if you're talking with a broker and we're conflicted on this side, they'll say, well, Patty, you can tell somebody not to pay off their mortgage because that takes money out of the portfolio.
And reduces your compensation.
And I would do that. I would tell somebody, don't pay off your mortgage when you can't sleep at night, you're getting ready to retire, you worry about your cash flow needs, and you so want to pay that mortgage. I'm going to tell you, you can't. Are you kidding? They use that. That's the scenario. Vicky's shaking her head. That's the scenario they use on us all the time. We have people that retired. They take money out of the portfolio, by the way. And by the way, we issue it so that it is electronically submitted to their bank account on the same day of every month so that they get a paycheck. I do not tell them, go out and get a second job so you do not take money out of their portfolio. This is the craziest straw argument you've ever heard. So I got to go one more story. And you're part of this story.
Is there a blood pressure cuff somewhere? I'm getting a little concerned.
I do. I was actually with you in Chicago, and we were talking to Mary Shapiro.
That's right.
And I said to Mary Shapiro, and she had remembered meeting with me in her office because of another situation, but equally interesting, but I cannot disclose. She said to me, well, so Patty, what about this? Because we were talking about the Act of 40, the 40 Act. And I said, Mary, was there any discussion at the SEC about simply enforcing the Act of 40 on brokers that are not giving advice incidental, solely incidental? It is part of their job that they're doing it. You were there. What did Mary say?
She said, I was interviewing her on stage, and she paused for a moment and said, oh, we never thought of that. I'm paraphrasing on the answer.
No, that was pretty doggone close.
Pretty close.
And it's there. We already have it. The SEC doesn't need to even be doing this. We already have it. It's called the Act of 40. And by the way, it's investment advisor, ER. Doesn't matter, ER, OR. It's there. It's there. Enforce the law that's already there. Xanax, please.
So in a moment, I want to bring the audience into this. I'm hoping you have a few questions. I have one for you to get us started. But Bob, talk about this form client relationship summary, CRS. Good thing, bad thing? How might you change it?
Well, if you read the first thing I did was I read the form that would disclose what financial advisors are like. And I if I didn't actually know and interact with financial advisors, I would have no idea what the hell they were talking about. These people mostly manage assets as near as the SEC can tell, and they constantly monitor and trade. And the financial planning profession has evolved since the 1980s, and that's one of the things that I said in my comment letter. We've moved on from some of these things that you seem to think that we do. And we have all these conflicts of interest, and the conflicts of interest were never really defined. They were just articulated. They have them. And the disclosure for the brokers, what they said the brokers do and what the brokers actually do was very different. They didn't say the brokers are there to sell you stuff. They said the brokers are there to keep an eye on your portfolio and facilitate transactions, and whatever that means. So I what I would like is something that reflects the real world. When I propose things, I said, you're in a sales relationship when you're working with a broker, and you need to be cautious about taking any advice they give, because the advice is probably going to be subordinate to the interests of the firm and to the broker. They're one of the least funny jokes I've ever heard, and I used to hear it a lot from brokers, was the ideal investment is beneficial to the customer and to the firm and to the broker. And then you got to sneer a little bit. Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And I guess that's funny in some circles. It's funny in a predatory environment. It's not so funny, in our environment. And I think that's what's lacking is, the clarity of this. I have actually sat in a bar anonymously right to the Wall Street offices in downtown Manhattan, in lower Manhattan. And I'd listen to the conversations, and people would go into the bar and celebrate having ripped off their customers and collected huge commissions. I never heard anybody celebrating, wow, we did a great job for our clients. Never once. I mean, that was so far from what they it was, here's the commission we made, here's how much we made. They had no idea how much we took out of this. We're, aren't we great? And raise a glass to the predatory behavior that we're darn good at. And I would invite people to try that sometime. I was there to speak at a meeting, and figured, well, why not? I'll go and have a drink and sip a margarita and listen to what they do. And I have to tell you, I got a little bit sick to my stomach. I'm thinking about going back someday and taking a recording device and just writing a book. I'll spend a week in that bar and writing a book, just taking quotes from what people were saying. And
You spend a week in the bar, make sure those quotes are accurate, Bob.
And I think that would be a wonderful disclosure document.
So turning to the audience, so all of us engage in a lot of online services anymore. It's the most efficient way. It could be anything from buying a textbook, subscribing to a magazine, opening a bank account or a credit card account, or all kinds of things, right? And oftentimes we enter our information in, our name and address and phone and email, and I want to subscribe to this service, whatever it is. And what's the last thing that happens before you hit submit or whatever? You get this disclosure, right? And usually you have to scroll to the bottom of it before you hit I agree. Now, how many of you read that disclosure? There's one hand up, Bob, and it's the young lady who won the Canute's contest earlier and won the hat. So congratulations to you for taking the time to read those. I do not, and no other hands went up. So that does perhaps speak to disclosures, and I'm sure they're disclosing what they should and need to disclose. But any questions from the audience thus far about anything we've covered? I have some other questions of our panelists, but I want to make sure you have an opportunity as well.
I have a question.
We have one right here.
I'd rather fiduciary standards just wipe out all the RLA and the trust. So as a profession, do we even want to differentiated and take care of the client that way?
That is a great, great question. I think for me, it's the question behind the whole discussion we're having here. Bob, what's your answer to that?
Well, I didn't hear it.
I'm sorry. When David asked me to repeat the question, and in essence, it was: do we even want brokers to be fiduciaries and held to the fiduciary standard? The gentleman said he prefers there be a gap between the two, that there be two distinct business models. So, how do you answer that, Bob?
Yeah, that's my conflict of interest. In a perfect world, everybody would be regulated the same way, and there would be no commissions, and everybody would wear that halo. But what I want is the people who I like and respect in the financial planning world to have some daylight between them and the sales organizations, and there to be the ability to be clear about that. And so I think it's a marketing advantage. I do. I think that the SEC has done a wonderful job of preserving that marketing advantage for the true fiduciaries who are out there. And I have to say, I should probably be rooting for something different, but I root for exactly that. There to be that distance between the people who sell and the people who advise, so to speak.
Okay, that's Bob's answer. Patty?
I do too. I, if I'm going to be looking at the investor, which I do, I want more fiduciaries, but I don't want fiduciaries that aren't fiduciaries. That's why I have now 5 and a toe thumbs down on the best interest, because it sounds, I want daylight. Because it's okay. It's okay to have this business model. If you're clear that this is your business model, I mean, we don't say we are car consultants or advisors. We're car salesmen. We,
My first move was to talk about a fiduciary. It's for the CFP board just to simply strip all the CFPs.
I could hug you.
So,
Not
to,
because you're just teeing up what I was going
need
to
to
say.
repeat the question, or maybe it was more of a statement than a question. So, it was. Can you repeat that? So. So the gentleman's question was, when we sign up for the CFP designate, when we earn the CFP designation, we sign on to a fiduciary standard, which is being enhanced starting
as of 2019.
starting next year, in about a year. So what do the panelists think about stripping wirehouse representatives of their CFPs? Bob?
The CFP board has been very careful not to make that happen. And their argument is not totally illogical. I mean, in a perfect world, once again, I agree with that sentiment. But what the CFP board wants to do is infiltrate the brokerage world and kind of reform it from the inside out. So they want as many people in the brokerage world to be CFPs as possible, so that the CFPs in the brokerage world start advocating for higher standards and for better behavior in the brokerage world, and to be allowed to register as RIAs, which they're not currently. And there's a question whether that is actually working or whether it's likely to work. But it's their strategy, and I think it's a logical strategy. I don't like it that much, but I think it's logical that the more the public looks for people who have the CFP designation, and the more people in the brokerage world who have that designation, the more power those people who have the CFP will have within the brokerage world to influence it for the better.
Bob, do you know the percentage of brokers to RIAs that have the CFP license?
No.
Do you know what that percentage is?
That percentage is. I know that there's at least a third of the CFPs are brokers in some manner.
I think it's Canute. Do you know that percentage?
Hmm.
That's the issue that goes to the heart of your question. I worked on the as a review person because I was chair of the Board of Practice Standards, and when Harold was chair of the Board of Governors, and and Harold and I were a review team a few years ago when they were looking at redoing the Code of Ethics and Practice Standards, and now they've done it again. Harold, we don't really know whatever happened to all the work we did several years ago, do we? So they got around to it again, and so they asked me to be a reviewer again. And so I sat in the room with the commission who had done all the heavy lifting to get the standards where they are, and Leo, the general counsel, and went through all of this that's coming out, the new Code of Ethics and Practice Standards. I think it's a better organized document than it was before. It takes out redundancies and some of those things. They actually use the fiduciary word now, not just if you're doing elements of financial planning, but if you're giving financial advice. So it's a much broader umbrella, if you will. They do still say avoid, but manage in the client's best interest, conflicts that can't be avoided. They use terminology like that. The terminology, I think, is good. If you want to grow the number of CFP professionals, the insurance companies, when I taught the review courses, my students that were coming in that were they were broker-dealer people, brokers, insurance agents, and CPAs and attorneys. Those were the people I taught in my review courses. And I'll go back to something Bob Plays said when he was at the SEC. He came in 2000 to talk to the CFP board when I was chair, and this is 18 years ago, we're still talking about the same thing. And we called him in because we wanted to understand that solely incidental, why aren't you? They're now calling themselves investment advisors, financial advisors, wealth managers, whatever. Why is that now still viewed by the SEC as solely incidental? Why aren't you enforcing the Act of 40? And he said they were under the Act of 34, brokers are, that's the suitability standard. And he said that we wanted them to start acting more like you all with he didn't say the halos, but I'm calling us the halos. And they started to migrate more towards that. And the SEC was thrilled that they were doing that. And he said, we didn't want to get them under the tent and then he used the tent word, and drop the tent on them. And and Bob, by the way, was part of this group for CFP board. Barb Roper was. So they looked to industry thought leaders in doing the new standards. They're not, I don't believe that, and Bob, I think you've said this, in a perfect world, you and I would draw it differently, but we're not in that world yet. If anything, I think we're really far away from it. And so I don't see the CFP board drawing the line any firmer than they've drawn it now in the world in which we live, while we want more CFP professionals under at least that fiduciary standard, which is way better than the SEC's. And their letter to the SEC, go on the SEC's website and read the coalition's letter to the SEC. It does a really good job of comparing similarities, duty of care, both, duty of loyalty, not both. They go through and show the differences in what the SEC's proposal is saying and what the CFP board's practice standards and code of ethics that will be coming out, that are out but will be effective next year. They do a great job, and I think the CFP board is way better than what we're looking at with the SEC. But to your point of the question of the daylight, I want daylight. If you're a salesman, call yourself a broker, call yourself what you are. If you're a fiduciary, call yourself what you are. And then and use it in your marketing that you are.
So let's pull on that a little bit more. And Bob, I'll turn to you on this. The SEC is, in its proposal, is attempting to address this issue of brokers calling themselves advisors. They want to look like you to the public. So they've started calling themselves advisors quite some time ago, and it has created confusion in the marketplace. The SEC understands that, and they attempted to address that in the. You have a friend?
Yeah, I have a cat in my lap.
They attempted to. It threw me off for just a second.
It's a fiduciary cat.
They attempted to address that in the rule by saying if you're a broker, you can no longer call yourself an advisor.
Yeah, yeah,
Great big, however, if you're a dual registrant as a broker and an advisor, which you can do, and oh, by the way, 85% of brokers are also registered as an advisor. If they are registered as an advisor, they are an advisor, and the SEC is saying, we can't tell you you can't call yourself an advisor because you are one.
Yeah,
Can that be improved upon?
Well, yeah, I think there's room for improvement there. I think that's an understatement. You know, the thing that I found amusing about that was that's in the 40 Act. If you look at the 40 Act, there are registered investment advisors, and if you go back to the materials that that Congress was putting out to justify the act, they were drawing a distinction between touts and stock touts and honest advisors. And so right there in the 40 Act, you're not supposed to call yourself an advisor unless you actually, for a living, give advice, unless it's not solely incidental to what you do. If you look at any brokerage ad, you see that what they're selling, or at least what they're putting out to the public, is we're advisors. And so it's very clear that the brokerage firms adopted the advisor terminology in contradiction to what the 40 Act was supposed to say. So the SEC comes out with this new proposal. They say, hey, we're going to do this new thing that we're going to throw a very small bone to the profession and say brokers can no longer call themselves advisors, however you spell it. But they can still call themselves financial planners, wealth managers, asset managers. You know, there are so many terms that they can use that'll allow them to wear sheep's clothing, that, you know, this one term, you know, they can't use this particular sheep. They've got to use these other sheep if they're going to pretend to be sheep instead of wolves. So, you know, I don't think that matters at all. I think there are some people who think that was a big concession to the profession, but in the actual real world, if somebody calls themselves a wealth manager or financial advisor or financial planner, they're doing just as an effective job of disguising their real agenda as if they call themselves an advisor.
Any other questions from the audience? We have one over here. So the question is, if I can rephrase, who are we trying to protect with this notion of making sure there's a bright line between brokers and advisors, and brokers can't call themselves an advisor? Because a typical advisor client might have $500,000, $1 million more. You would think a more sophisticated investor. So Patty, how do you address the question?
We're trying to protect the investor, not the advisors. Is that your question? When you say who are you trying?
Which investors? The $10,000 investor, the $1 million investor?
I think it's a 10,000 investor that we're trying to protect. Because again, you don't worry that Dina and Harold and John and Katie are giving fiduciary advice. So, and you don't. I'm going to turn the question back around on you all. How do you see yourselves wherever you go from here, whether you go to New York, whether you go to a boutique firm, how do you see yourselves fitting into the framework that exists today?
Anybody?
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Right.
And I think a Vanguard is a great place. I mean, I agree. They have the benefit of having products that are priced fairly, and they've been the leader indexing. So Vanguard has I think, an excellent business model, and they are attracting a lot of newly minted CFPs because of that. So I think that's a wonderful, um, and Cheryl Garrett's network. You know, if we are, you would expect, because of how passionate I am about CFP, that we do financial planning. All of our clients, we do. And I think that that's going to be part of what people are going to look for going forward, especially with the demographics and the older baby boomers retiring, and looking for how do we, and Wade Bow and Harold, and you've got people here that have written wonderful articles about how do you fund retirement? What does that look like when this W-2 ends? You got the 401k house or whatever else. You know, you have to look at all your assets. So I think Vanguard is a wonderful way, and other Cheryl Garrett network and they do that. They do financial planning on an hourly basis and give recommendations. Well, so there are places, but are any of you considering going into the insurance world? Okay, tell me why.
There was an emphatic
No, tell me,
negative head
tell
shake
me
there
why
just for
not,
the
because this is going to be important to hear.
archive.
And let me tell you what, that is music to this person, as I'm getting to the end, near the end of my career. I think you are the person, and I think programs when career of CFP board, I worked so hard to get you. Georgetown came on board. I worked so hard to get you to the program, and Vicki knows Texas Tech is always, you know, you hold up Texas Tech, you know, get programs. Oh, okay. As the model. So that just music to my ears.
So David has a microphone. Since we're getting some great questions from the audience, he's got a microphone so that we can capture your questions. We have maybe 5 minutes left. So
I think we're indirectly involved in the insurance field, just like any other product field for that matter, because we're also sending a negative signal to the public by poo-pooing products. Because when you start, as soon as you start recommending, and then in the implementation stage, you do need some sort of products in order to carry out that plan. So we need to be careful not to step on product. It's just the way we get there. So because I used to be in life insurance sales myself, and it's just an offer. Because if you do it the correct way, then you're providing a solution rather than trying to lead with the sale.
And that's exactly for all of us that are doing planning. You need to cover your risk before you do anything else. And that's called insurance. You either keep it, transfer it entirely, or share it. But you got to decide what's the best for the client. And if you don't sell it, you got to have a relationship with someone that can facilitate that transaction. Absolutely.
So, Bob, I'm going to ask you one more question. We have maybe 3 or 4 minutes left. Let's assume, for the sake of discussion right now, that this SEC proposal passes in something like its current form. Take us into the future. What does the industry look like under this regulation?
I don't think it's any different. I think it's exactly where we are right now. You know, by declining to make a stand against the brokerage firms, the SEC has opted to, you know, muddy the waters a little bit, but the waters were pretty muddy before. They've made, I'll create a lot of paperwork for advisors, which is what they seem to think their role is in the world. We're all going to have to live under a regime where a whole bunch of paper is pushed across to the client and the client won't read it, which is roughly what they do now. So I don't think there's any difference really. I want to go back to that product thing that the student, I couldn't see the student from where I am because the camera's pointed toward you guys, but there's a difference in this product thing. There are fiduciary products coming out right now, and term insurance has been relatively fiduciary for a long time. And then there are products that are just loaded with commissions. And the distinction to me is, you know, you're a opioid salesperson, you know, and you go out there and you say, you know, you're feeling uncomfortable, you're hurting, you're feeling anxious, here, try this, and I'll get paid a whole bunch of money. Or you can give them something that will directly address their need that's not quite as lucrative. I think there's an awful lot of salespeople out there who are saying, you know, we're filling a need, and the need is insurance. Well, yeah, but how are they filling that need? Yes, there's a need for insurance, but there isn't a need for insurance where most of the benefits go to the insurance company and the broker. And you know, so I get tired of that argument, if that makes sense.
Any closing comment
About my world?
What does the world look like if this regulation passes in something like its current form going forward?
I think I am so enlightened and excited by you all that I think this world is going to be just fine because we've got you all coming into it. And you all have been taught by faculty, and your heart is in the right place. I interviewed a young man years back and experienced because we didn't have Texas Techs and things going on all those years ago. And late in college, he was a psych major, that he wanted to come into financial planning. And after the interview, I wasn't hiring, but after the interview, I hired him because I thought there's going to come a day that I wish I had this young man. And I know I can teach everything he needs to know. He enrolled in the Georgetown program because that's what it was up at home, and passed the CFP out of the gate at 23 with no background like you all have. Why did I do that? One reason. He had the right heart. And I think we've got enough students that are being taught now, and you have the right heart coming out of this. When you have the right heart, you do the right thing. When you have the right heart, it isn't all about the dollar. Early when I started in this, someone said to me, Patty, you'll never be successful because you don't put money in the bank, quote. My response to that person was, I put a lot of money in the bank that counts for me. And it was doing the right thing. Because when you do the right thing, it all comes around. SEC, lawmakers, they can push paper at you all day long. You'll do the right thing. You'll follow the law. And the clients will get served. And this generation that's coming up now is going to be the deal breaker for salespeople that sheep and wolves in sheep clothing. You all are going to be the ones. You really are, because this isn't going to go away. Remember, I talked to Mary Shapiro back in the 90s. This isn't going to go away. It isn't going to get fixed. It's going to be okay because we have you coming up to make certain that it gets. That's my view.
That is quite a closing statement. Thank you, Patty. Last comment for me. Thank you all for the choice that you've made of professions. And Patty just said it better than I can say it. But just to extend that, and based on a couple of the questions we got from you over here, I strongly urge you, find a way to serve people who today are not being served by professional, objective, fiduciary financial planners and investment advisors. The people who do have 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000, they need your help every bit as much as the person who has $1 million needs your help. Please find a way to help them more, probably. Find a way to help them, whether that's pro bono, whether that's using technology to deliver scale to that audience. I urge you to do that. Lastly, I want to thank Canute for hosting this event. I want to congratulate Harold for yet another well-deserved award. I'll have more to say about that later. Bob has his annual conference next week, and I will be there, really looking forward to that. So he is very busy with preparations for that and could not be here in person, but thanks for taking the time, Bob. Patty, thanks for taking the time to come out here. I know you had some travel troubles yesterday getting here as well. I think we'll end on that. Thank you, Bob and Patty.